What's going on, Packers fans? Happy Tuesday. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. It is Tuesday. That means the one and only Justis Mosqueda from acmepackingcompany.com is joining us. You can find him on social media at JUMOSQ. Justis, wonderful to see your lovely face. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. Yeah. Just got back into Portland last night. Spent 4 days in Oakland. Saw a
Nice.
peacock. Peacock wouldn't let me pet it. I got within 2 feet of the peacock, and then it wanted nothing to do with me. But I didn't come with food, so
There
that
you
was
go.
my problem.
That is definitely your mistake. Are peacocks petable in any, is that a normal thing?
I think it was so the lore behind the peacock was apparently it lived like a couple neighborhoods down, and it was like an indoor-outdoor peacock. And then one 4th of July, it must have gotten spooked, and it just appeared in my sister-in-law and brother-in-law's neighborhood. So it's just been like living in the trees there. I don't know how it gets food. Those things are big. I mean, I assume it's going to eat a lot. They can't fly, but it like climbs up the tree. It was weird. I wanted to pet it, but no shot.
No dice. That is unfortunate. I guess you're gonna have to make another trip back next year to have a better opportunity and maybe see if it can come to fruition next year. We've got a lot to go over. It is obviously OTAs last week. OTAs coming up again today on Tuesday as we're recording this, of course, on Monday. I want to get your thoughts on that. But before we get there, a pretty significant story in the NFL on Monday with Frank Ragnow, the center for the Detroit Lions, announcing his retirement, not only obviously from an NFL standpoint, but certainly in the NFC North and with those Packers Lions rivalries, including week 1 coming up to start the season. This is a pretty significant loss for Detroit. I don't know about you, Justis, but I really enjoyed the heyday of Frank Ragnow versus Kenny Clark one-on-one in the trenches. That tape was always must watch following games. But he is a big piece of their identity on the interior of the offensive line. They already lost Zeitler in the offseason, which, they go out and get the kid from Georgia, Ratledge, to potentially take his place. But now you're probably looking at a interior offensive line of Mahogany, Glasgow, and Rutledge, one of the two. And then, as their interior, that certainly is a lot different than where it was a season ago.
Yeah, for sure, man. Because the thing about Glasgow is like Glasgow was kind of the guy who was pinned in to that opposite guard spot. And he did not perform well last year. So your returning starter on the offensive interior is a guy who hurts you, right? Relative to, the NFL average. I'm not saying that they're,
Right.
it hurts you compared to starting another guy on the team. That's not what I mean. But yeah, I mean, you throw that in. I mean, they lost basically what it boils down to. They lost their 2 good interior offensive linemen this year,
Yep.
right? They added Ratledge. I'm interested in seeing if Ratledge is going to be a center or a guard for him moving forward.
Yep.
Mahogany is a guy that, you brought up. He didn't really play last year. He was a 6th-round pick, right? And then they drafted Miles Frazier out of LSU in the 5th round. So I guess Mahogany and Frazier are going to be battling for that other guard spot, assuming Ratledge is going to play center. I would have kind of thought, yeah, man. I mean, it looks a whole lot better if it's Ratledge starting at guard, Ragnow starting at center, and then, that trio of Mahogany, Glasgow, and Frazier fighting for the other guard spot. Now it's like Glasgow is the only guy with like a solidified starting role, and it's like, whoa, this changed quickly. Yeah, Ragnow's a good player. I know I saw a different publication posted like this morning, unfortunate timing, that was like, Ragnow having contract issues with the Lions is no big deal. Didn't realize that it was potentially a contract type of situation. I don't know what that means moving forward. If like Glasgow is, or if Ragnow is for sure done, or if they could come back with a better number, something like that, and convince him otherwise. But I saw that Instagram post where he's talking about he's thought about this for months and all this stuff, and it's time for him to walk away. I've done one deep dive so far. I need to stop traveling and stop bouncing around and stuff like that so I can look deeper into the Packers opponents, because we're about to get into the dead season content-wise, right? After OTAs, I mean, basically like when camp starts. So I want to use that time to kind of have like the bones of the conversations that we're going to have during the season. When I did that deep dive a couple of weeks ago on the Lions, I came away thinking by far their weakest positions or position groups, I guess I should say, is pass rush on the defensive side, just because I mean, I know everyone wants Hutchinson to be 100%. I'm like, yeah, I believe it when I see it.
Sure.
Which is not a terrible thing. Like I don't think he's going to be a non-factor. I just don't know if he's going to be the Hutchinson that we've seen in the past this year at least. Davenport's off of injury, all that stuff. They don't have that much pass rushing depth behind him. Derek Barnes, it looks like he's going to be full-time off-ball linebacker moving forward. They want to play more base than they did last year. When he went down, they basically played nickel the entire time. And then the other position was the interior offensive line. And now they've lost their star on the interior offensive line. So, definitely a position of weakness that could not have afforded this type of a move. So, got to be a bummer in Detroit right now for sure.
Yeah, big time. And this is a team that's predicated on their offensive line, and specifically with Jared Goff, so much of his success is having that strong offensive line in front of him, especially on the interior. And now it's a potential weakness, and you could have that exploited a little bit more. That is going to definitely affect Jared Goff. And then, of course, your inside running game as well, their ability to pound it inside and then obviously change paces with Gibbs as well. But this is a huge part of who they are. We saw Philly be able to overcome the loss of a starting center this past year with Jason Kelce retiring, and obviously they were able to overcome it and win a Super Bowl. But I think this is going to be really one of their biggest adversities of this offseason, because yes, they lost Ben Johnson, they lost Aaron Glenn, but you could look at the rest of the roster and be like, they are getting Hutchinson back to some extent. Yes, they lose Carlton Davis, but they bring in DJ Reed. They lose Zeitler, but they get Ratledge in the second round. Like, you could kind of see everything else being like, they're going to continue to be really good. But now there's this like place along their offensive line that just does not look remotely the same. And I do think that's going to affect both their running game and Jared Goff.
100%. I mean, Andy, I don't know how many times we've seen all these. Since he was with the Los Angeles Rams, right, where all the Goff stuff, it all depends on whether he's pressured or not. Because when he's unpressured, he's performing like a top 8 quarter. And this isn't just pressured versus non-pressured, right? It's the league when they're unpressured and the league when they're pressured, right? When he's unpressured, he's a top 10 quarterback in this league, right? When he's pressured, he's like 25th. And that's over the lifetime of his career, right? So the book is kind of out on Goff in terms of you got to get after him. And I know that's easy to say, and it's probably true of every quarterback, but it's more drastic with Goff than it is for anyone else in the league. I definitely a room for concern. The other thing too is like the Lions last year basically used 2 wide receivers. They really didn't throw to the third guy. I think who was it? It was like
Tim Patrick.
Tim Patrick, who they had as almost like a designated outside blocking receiver. Is kind of how they used him. I think he had like 200
Jared Boykin back in the day, just basically as a decoy and a blocker. Yeah.
Like they weren't stoked about the situation, right? And now their answer for that was Isaac Tesla, who was a slot receiver at Arkansas, converted quarterback from the D3 level, has all the athleticism in the world, right? But who knows what you do with him, especially if your plan for him is to be in the slot. Well, they used Jameson Williams in the slot a lot. They used Amon-Ra St. Brown in the slot a lot. So are you limiting your other I'll say better receivers so that guy can get on the field? It's a little bit of a question mark. Plus, they spent 3 third-round picks on that guy, which is still one of the craziest moves in the draft. So, I'm definitely a little more worried about the Lions passing game this year than last year.
The other thing that should be mentioned too, not to spend the entire time in the Lions here, is just the depth on their offensive line takes a huge hit as well, because they don't have. I mean, we're talking about some of their starters obviously just not being potentially up to par. At least,
right. I mean, we're talking about Christian Mahogany as a guy who's like basically slated into the lineup right now. That guy's hardly played, and he was a 6th-round pick last year.
Yep.
So,
so their depth along that. They also did something similar last year, I believe, with was it Giovanni Manu? Was somebody else that they spent went aggressive and went and got
the kid from BC, or UBC, the kid from Canada. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so we'll see if maybe he can be ready or something, but that's a tall task for him as well. But yeah, definitely a huge loss for the Lions and a huge opportunity for the Packers in their defensive front to maybe find a weakness on that line, get to Goff a little bit more, stop that run game a little bit more, and maybe hopefully, get over the hump that has been the Detroit Lions as of late for the Packers. Just one real quick note, Jaden Yankee was also released from the Packers. I'm assuming that you don't have any Jaden Yankee takes, but any thoughts on who they could potentially go get to replace him, or not him, but that roster spot
I saw
or
one of
position?
our well, position wise, I don't know because they already added a receiver, right?
Yep.
Um, it's really interesting camp movements that we talk about camp bodies a lot. There's not actually that many camp bodies. Like guys who have just like no shot
No
of
chance. Yeah.
like making the 53 or the practice squad. Um, Everyone points to the 53 man roster. You got to remember that there's 16 guys on the practice squad plus the other guy. I mean, you basically 70 of the 90
70.
make it,
Yep.
right? So you're really only losing those 20. And I know like the UFLs, I don't think he's the commissioner. He's the money guy. It's Jerry Cardinal. If
Okay.
you don't understand how the UFL ownership structure kind of works, they have The Rock. The Rock is the guy that television networks want to get into the room with. The Rock's ex-wife, I believe her name is Danny Garcia, spent a lot of time working on television contract deals in the past. So The Rock gets you in the room. His ex-wife is the person who's actually negotiating the television contracts. And Jerry Cardinal, I think it's like Cardinal VC or something like that, financing something, is like the actual money man. He's the guy putting the money forward. Cardinal had some interview with a publication. This is so bad because I forgot what it was even. But he was saying, the NFL, you cut everyone but 53 guys. Like, there's plenty of talent that's gonna trickle down to our league and all this stuff. Nothing to worry about, which is kind of true and kind of not. When I worked with the XFL, like you start to notice that like a lot of those the 20, right, the 20 that don't make it from the 90 man roster to the 70, right, the
Yep.
53 plus the 16 practice squad guys. A lot of that 20, a lot of those are receivers because you just need the extra bodies at receiver to catch all these balls and give all these guys reps throughout camp. There's not actually that many like offensive linemen, defensive linemen, guys like that who are on the roster today who are, the plan is not to sign them to a practice squad moving forward, right? So the Packers added another receiver last week when they got rid of Johnson, right? The
Yes.
Alexander
Yep.
Johnson, the defensive end who didn't practice in the open OTAs on Tuesday. And both of these
Jeremiah
players,
Martin. Jeremiah Martin.
Jeremiah Martin, sorry, I got
Yep.
him and Deslin Alexander
Correct.
confused.
You're good.
But so they swapped out a defensive end for a receiver already. Now they're getting rid of a receiver. I think it could be pretty open ended. Both of those guys, by the way, were waived with a injury designation, which basically means that they revert to IR, but then that means the Packers have to reach an injury settlement with them. They're not necessarily going to make that $750,000 salary that is going to count against the Packers salary cap for the entire year. It just means up until they're injured or up until they're recovered, the Packers have to pay them out basically like a weekly stipend type of thing. And according to Aaron Wilson, both of them have already reached injury settlements with the Packers.
Yeah, Jeremiah Martin was on the list today if they waived him injured off of injured reserve. So
Right.
he's gone for sure.
I'm looking. Benny Sapp became available today from
Falcons,
the
former
Atlanta
Packer.
Falcons, former Packer. So a lot of times when it's like, oh, the Packers are making a move, I wonder what that's for. And then it always ends up being like, oh, it's a guy that they've had in previously or a guy that they've been interested in since, pre-draft visits or something like that. So I think Benny Sapp, might have a chance in landing in Green Bay when you guys watch him on Tuesday or whatever. But that's my best guess. Could really be anyone.
No, for sure. The Sapp thing is interesting because not only has he had experience there, but they're a little bit thin at safety. I mean, not from
They
like
haven't really added. They haven't really added anyone, right?
no.
Are they calling the UNLV guy the safety?
Bugs,
I can't
Bugs, they're
remember.
calling a safety is what they're calling it.
The
So they're
the
calling,
corner from FAU.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
So they're
yeah,
calling Bugs a safety. They're calling Baldwin a corner. But that was the guy. But they have like all of their core guys, right, that are like legitimately fighting for roster
yeah.
spots. And then after that, there's not really anything, which is kind of interesting if you look at it. Again, Omar, I suppose Omar Brown, but he actually even was on or at least got a cup of coffee on a call up this past year. So it's kind of Omar Brown and then Bugs Brown, and then nobody really after that. So if in fact they would bring him in, and he's a special teams guy as well, which would make some sense. So we'll see if that ends up being the case, but that would be one that would actually make some logical sense for both safety and special teams. So we'll see. That's a good one. I like that one. And Benny Sapp was a guy who caught my eye right away as I don't know if he was a rookie tryout guy or maybe it was just a UDFA. He's a UDFA.
I think he was a UDFA, but I mean, people like fans were excited about him for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He looked good. That like I remember the very first rookie mini camp, he was working out in front of me, and I'm just like, take this for what it's worth. But like he kind of looked the part, and then he had a nice preseason, had a pick, and so on and so forth. But obviously, is not stuck around anywhere for any period of time. Let's talk about those OTAs, Justice. I know you had a conversation with Nagler this past week, so we don't need to kind of repeat everything. But as you were kind of gathering all the tweets in and trying to make sense of everything, what were some of the key things that you took away from OTAs last week?
Thought it was really interesting that Monk got a look with the first team offensive line when Kadeem Telfort and Travis Glover were called up ahead of him for a playoff game.
Yeah, no, for
Right?
sure.
I mean, that's seems like a shift. I mean, I like Monk coming out. I like what I saw in the summer. But just looking at how the team used inactives, looking at how the team brought up guys, for injuries during the season, it seemed to me like Monk was falling out of favor with
Yep.
at least the coaching staff, I guess, right? But the coaching staff is running training camp, so something must have shifted since the Packers last played a game, or maybe they were protecting Monk because Monk came in as a smaller guy, right? Like maybe they were protecting Monk from a situation where he comes into the NFL when he's still trying to develop an NFL type of body, and they
Yeah.
don't want to shoot out his confidence at that point, and they want to wait for him to get onto the field until he builds up a little bit of muscle or something like that. But I did think it was really interesting that he got a crack with ones. He was overlooked by two other guys for a guard spot, right? Last playoff game, last game that we saw the Packers participate in, and it was still Jordan Morgan is working with the twos at left tackle and stuff. And I'm sure they're going to shake up Jordan Morgan with the left tackle stuff. I think it'll be interesting to see, like, monitor how often that is
Yep.
happening, or just in general, Jordan Morgan watch, right? Is he going to start getting some reps at right guard with the ones, all this stuff?
And he did get some time with the ones at right guard, even in OTAs
Okay.
last week. So he got some time there. And then so here was my read on it. And again, it's tough to glean almost anything from this. It almost felt like they wanted to not have Sean Ryan just play center, that they kind of wanted to move him back and forth a little bit because they probably
Mhm.
recognize once Jenkins is there, they don't probably need Ryan to spend a ton of time at center, just to like a handful of snaps here and there, just to kind of have him ready for it. But it almost felt like they didn't want to, put him primarily there. So move Monk over, let him kind of take some of the center reps, and then just kind of rotate those guys with the ones. And then meanwhile, keep Jordan Morgan at left tackle for the primary portion of it, and then let Rashid kind of stay at left tackle for now. And then Belton was working a little bit at right tackle. I'm sure he's going to move around eventually. I'm sure they don't want those guys kind of swinging too much to begin with. Not obviously Morgan's different, but Belton more specifically here. But yeah, I would very much expect, and again with Morgan, that he even started to work in with the ones at right guard towards the end of practice. So I think that's definitely
Okay.
going to be something that happens. And I think he'll definitely start rotating in with Rashid Walker at some point, unless Walker just looks incredible and, staves him off for the entirety. But based on what we heard from Goody previously, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think there's going to be a competition there at some point.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I would watch too on the offensive line is Belton and just what's happening with Bone, because I think Belton is a guy who can compete at right guard. If he nails down the playbook and all that stuff. I know people see big guy and they're like, he should be playing tackle. I know you've heard the coaching staff talk about his feet and stuff like that, but I still think his feet translate better in at guard than at tackle. And maybe that's a bias that I'm coming in with and I'm just going to be wrong. But That's what I think. Defensive tackle was interesting. They had Kobe Wooden out there with Wyatt with the ones because Kenny wasn't doing team reps.
Correct.
That is a very light defensive tackle room if that is the situation. I don't think Wooden is actually playing at 237 or whatever they have him listed at on the team roster.
Right.
But that's what he's listed on the team roster, right? I mean, if you have two
230
guys and
wait,
they
is it 287? Can't be
no, it's
237.
or 273. Did I get it backwards?
Yeah, I think you said 237, which I was like, whoa, wait a second here. Would be amazing.
No,
I want to see a defensive tackle at 237.
273. I do not. No. I, as someone who's coached high school football before, I'm out. But yeah, I mean, if you have two guys combined on the defensive interior and it's less than 600 pounds, that's bad news. Because I don't know if Wyatt was even playing three. Like, was Wooden playing nose? Please tell me Wooden was playing nose. That
I
could have
don't
been a
even know
bad
that they
time.
had it like separated. I'd have to go back and look at it. Like, yeah, I should have looked at it closer, I guess. But it just kind of felt like they were both, kind of interchangeable at that point in time. And I don't know how much, like, again, with run game in OTAs when you're not wearing pads and there's like non-contact.
Right. It's just,
yeah,
it's conditioning right now, guys.
it really is.
The DB stuff didn't surprise me. I know it surprised some people. Now are like, wait, what will happen with Javon Bullard? I'm like, I've been saying this since we signed a corner, man. Like, we signed a slot. The slot is where Bullard played. Now what happens to Bullard? Especially if Jair comes back. Like,
that
he might be
the big
2
one.
injuries away. Like,
that to me is the big one. I think if Jair is back, then you really get into an interesting situation with Bullard. If he's not, I still think you have a big nickel with Bullard in the slot, Hobbs and Nixon on the outside, and Williams and McKinney at safety, and then a normal 11 personnel nickel that's an obvious passing down nickel where you've got Hobbs in the slot with Nixon and Valentine on the outside with Williams and McKinney at safety in that situation. So I think we would see two different nickels, but if Jair's back, then it gets a lot more complicated unless you're going to keep Jair off the field on obvious rundowns and basically do the same thing where Nixon and Hobbs are outside and Bullard's in the slot. And then basically it's more Jair taking Valentine's place than it is anything else. Outside of that, it becomes much more interesting, which is, by the way, what I would do if I were Green Bay. If I was going to bring Jair back, I would not play him in base defense. I would not play him in the heavy nickel where it's more, 12 personnel and obvious rundown or at least likely rundown situations. I don't know if you can have that conversation with Jair. I'm not sure if that's something where he's just going to go out there and take his place no matter what as a quote unquote starter. But I would listen, trying to play him 60, 70 snaps per game has not exactly gone well over the course of the last 4 years, and trying to keep him healthy. And it's not like he's a good run defender anyway. Just give me Jair on obvious passing downs, and that to me might be the best way to utilize him.
It's going to be interesting to see how that contract restructure happens. Because if all of his salary gets turned into game bonuses, then I think that incentivizes the Packers to, use him until you lose him.
Yeah.
Basically type of situation, right? Because okay, if he gets hurt, that's money that we're saving on the cap for next year. Versus if you keep him and you keep him limited and you're only playing him 40% of the snaps or something like that, you're still paying full price for the guy. So
True.
you might as well use them. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. We're past June 1st now. Still no trade nailed down.
I'm very good at percentages when it comes to Jair Alexander, but I'm at a loss. Where would you put your Jair meter right now if he's coming back or not?
I have no idea. I mean, it's gone so late that I have to think that they got to be at least close. So
to a decision, close to bringing him back, close to
bringing him back. Because at this point, I think it just makes the longer this drags out, the more it makes sense for everyone involved to be like, yo, just come back. The scheme, all this stuff.
When you have the report from Matt from Schneidman that there is a contract that has been, or like a renegotiation that's been offered from Green Bay, and then now we're basically like a week later and nothing. Does that lead you to believe probably just more in negotiations, or it leads you more to believe of like, man, if they've tried it and that didn't work, now it's just not going to happen. You're the former.
Yeah, because I mean, there's no rush. There really is no rush. I mean, maybe Jair is just like, yeah, I'll just come back phase 2 or phase 3, right? I
Yeah,
mean, we're seeing that with Aaron Rodgers right now, where everyone's beating around the bush, and it's very clear Aaron is just like, yeah, I just don't want to do phase 1, phase 2 OTAs. I don't want to get blamed for not doing phase 1, phase 2 OTAs. So I'm just not going to sign until we're in phase 3.
yeah.
Um, so
You will not be the first nor the last player in the history of the NFL to utilize that tactic.
yeah, so like until phase 3, until mini camp, I don't think there's like a real deadline. All this stuff. I mean, it's all conditioning, man. It really
Yeah.
is conditioning right now. So if he's doing stuff and working out on his own, like there's no real difference whether he's in Green Bay or not. It's not like there's a new quarterback in and he's a receiver and he has to build chemistry with the guy. Like he knows the defense, right?
Yeah.
Like it's come back healthy, get a good number on the restructure for yourself. I'm sure
I
there's
would
things that
argue,
him and his agent are haggling over, but I can't imagine like it's all financial. So the big broad stroke stuff, if it's close, it's already relatively solved already, right? So maybe they're bickering about this and that. There's they probably don't care that much about it, and there's no hard deadline in the near future. So I wouldn't be surprised if it drags out a little bit, but I would be surprised if there was a change of mindset from either side.
minicamp next week is going to be really interesting for both he
Yeah.
and Elton Jenkins. Just if Jair shows up, whether Elton shows up for mandatories or not, then unlike Jair, who you mentioned, it's like he knows the defense already. Getting Elton back acclimated at center and getting him working on checks and calls with Jordan and just sort of the
Mhm.
exchange and everything like that. That does feel like the sooner you can get him in and just working on that stuff, the better. Training camp will be plenty of time. That wouldn't be like a level of concern if he's there day one of training camp. I'm not concerned that he missed OTAs or mini camp or anything like that, but that's one that you probably don't want to drag on too long.
And with Love handling 2 different centers right now, I mean, who's to say that Love isn't putting more on his own plate, right? And
Sure.
they're just like, "Okay, we're gonna have to adapt to it, and Jordan, you're gonna have to be you're gonna have to be in charge of safety rotations. You're gonna have to be in charge of mic points." I mean, if you're gonna get anything through this, I keep calling it like conditioning period, um, you know, I mean, that's one way to do it. You're taking the playbook onto the field. You're not going to get hit or anything like that. Like now is the time to do it if you're going to learn it. So we'll see.
Any assignments for me, OTAs, Tuesday as we're recording this on Monday? Anything you want me to keep an extra eye on?
Not really. Who was the the corner who got in with the ones?
I don't know if you heard me talk about this. So the Packers have a
I
history of
didn't.
doing this. All right. So the Packers have a history of doing this. Ray Wilborn is a great example of this, the linebacker from a few years ago. All right.
Yeah.
So imagine like a snake draft in fantasy football, right? What they basically do is, so their primary corners with the ones were Hobbs, Valentine, and Nixon. All right. And then those 3 spots, they're going to play 90% of the reps with the ones on the one side. So they could have Kalen King, Kamal Haddon, or Robinson stick around. One of those guys stick around and play with the ones, but they're going to get 10% of the reps. So at best. So rather than those 3 guys be like with the ones, which would not be like, if Kalen King was over there, you wouldn't even think anything of like, yeah, okay, Kalen King's the next guy up, cool. But instead of him getting 10% of the reps, the next 3 are all down there getting 90% of the reps with the 2s over in that group. And then you've got a couple corners that are left over that are rotating in with the 10% with the 2s. And then you've got a couple corners, in this case, Gregory Jr., that was rotating in and playing like 10% with the 1s. And we, like, when it happened with Wilborn, we're all like, I remember it very distinctly of like, what the hell is Ray Wilborn doing in with the 1s at linebacker? Like, this makes no sense, like totally out of nowhere. And it was that exact same situation where the primary ones were playing, and then your next guys up were all down with the twos on the opposite side, getting 90% of the reps over there. So maybe it's something. I don't want to poo-poo it entirely and say, oh my goodness, like there's nothing there whatsoever. But I very much believe that this is a Ray Wilborn 2.0, and that the fourth, fifth, and sixth corners were down on the other side, getting all the reps that they could working with the twos.
I will say, I do think he's an interesting cornerback to keep in mind, though.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, he's played a ton of special team snaps.
Yep.
They've had their eye on him for a long time. He was a former draft pick. And again, Robert Rochelle and Corey Ballantyne both played more special team snaps than our kicker. Right? They played more snaps than McManus last year. Valentine isn't really a special teams guy.
Nope.
Jair's not going to be a special teams guy. Hobbs, you probably don't want playing on special teams. And Keyshawn, the only special teams he really plays is as a returner, right? So if we're going to need that fifth cornerback spot, and I don't think that we're going to keep six. Maybe we do end up keeping six, but I think it's a much better chance that we keep five just because of our roster construction right now. We're going to be heavy at safety. We're talking about linebacker. The team's Goots already said that they wanted to keep more linebackers last year than they ended up having because they ended up playing more base defense, which shouldn't be a surprise. You're going to play base defense about a third of the time in the NFL. You have the situation with Colin Oliver where you can't really treat him as a defensive end and you can't really treat him as a linebacker, right? So I think you're going to be at five corners. Four of your corners are already on the team. You want to play them at outside corner. You know, they have the potential to play outside corner, potential to play in the slot, all this stuff. But they're not really going to be special teams contributors. I think you want that fifth guy to be like a true blue special teams guy. And This is kind of, the only experienced special teams guy on the roster after those four guys. Because, the next one would probably be Kamal Haddon, who I think he was activated like 2 or 3 games last year.
Yep, 2. Yep. Yeah, no, I'm very interested. Special teams is going to play a huge role in that. And then the one thing I was going to say about Gregory Jr. is just that when he was practicing with the ones, he didn't look out of place. Like it wasn't like, oh, what the heck is this guy doing out there? Like he was out there and he looked good. So if you are only going to get those 10, 15% of the snaps out there, when you do get them with the ones, you better take advantage of them. And I thought he did. I thought he looked at least as much of the part that he could, given the situation and circumstance. So that is definitely a good sign for him moving forward. And we'll see if he gets more reps down the road with the ones as well. All right, a couple other things I wanted to pick your brain on really quick. There were a lot of people who took the Jordan Love did not have a down year and ran with that story from a national, from a local. There were a lot of Jordan Love did not have a down year in 2024 stories this past couple weeks. So we've had the opportunity, obviously, to see Jordan play these past couple of years. The injuries, no question, played a part. I think probably the reason it became even more of a story, more people wrote about it, is because usually Jordan doesn't push back that much. And that was one that he actually pushed back on when he was kind of asked the interview question. Your thoughts on Jordan having a quote unquote down year in 2024?
Hey friends, I'm so excited to tell you about this new game-changing product that I've been using before a big night out. It's called Pre-Alcohol. Now, ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Prebiotic Drink is the world's first genetically engineered prebiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's a buildup of that byproduct, not dehydration. That's to blame for rough days after drinking. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down, so just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night, to drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Now listen, I get it. I was a bit skeptical about pre-alcohol initially myself, but I've now used it for a bachelor party, the college basketball tournament, and recently for a friend's epic 40th birthday party, and I'm telling you, it's the real deal. And guess what? Summer is here, which means more opportunities to celebrate the warm weather. And before that backyard barbecue brew, the glass of Pinot watching the sunset at the beach, or a cocktail by the campfire, do not forget your ZBiotics pre-alcohol. Drink one before drinking and wake up feeling great and ready to take on the next day and all that summer has to offer. So go to zbiotics.com/packaday to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use code PACKADAY. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/packaday and use code PACKADAY Pack-A-Day at checkout for 15% off. Make sure to support our sponsors and use that code Pack-A-Day.
I'm sure he learned things. I mean, you could just point. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to do with it, man. Like, we obviously were terrible with drops last year.
Yep.
He battled through several injuries that started early on in the season.
Big time.
I'm sure he learned things, but at the same time, like what we saw second half 2 years ago, his first year as a starter, his numbers were much better than what they were over the course of last season. So,
At any
like,
point in time.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure to a certain extent, having as his athleticism limited and things like that, I'm sure it's uh like wearing a weighted vest when you're running or something like that, right?
Yep.
Where once you take that off, I'm sure you're going to be faster. But I mean, he did hit some bumps in the road too last year. So I kind of see sort of everyone's point. I don't think he got worse as like a quarterback. I don't think he's going to be worse in 2026 for what he went through in 2025. Sure, he learned things, dealt with a bunch of drops, was limited athletically. Not a great situation to be in, but the team still made the postseason.
No, for sure. And I'm right there with you too. I didn't think there was at any point in time where Jordan looked like he did at the end of 2023. I think not only were the injuries a burden to him, clearly the lack of practice time, going all the way back to training camp with the contract negotiations, and then all the time that he missed during the course of the season due to the ACL and then the groin and then the thumb. It makes it really, really difficult. And one of the things I always thought would be very interesting to do is look at, and again, we know PFF grades are not perfect by any means, but look at a player's PFF grade when they had a full week of practice compared to when they did not practice or like had half practice. And I wonder, just like in general, what players like grades on the average look like, and if they've had a full week or a partial week or did not practice at all. A lot of times that stuff really does legitimately matter. For some players it doesn't. They're just freaks no matter what, but a lot of those guys it does matter. And I just think the lack, and it's not even necessarily just with Jordan, but just the reps with his receivers, the rhythm, the timing, all of it, it definitely felt like it mattered last year. And I'm with you. I don't think we ever saw anything quite in 2024 like we did at the end of 2023.
Yeah.
Understandably so.
Yeah. For like, we all watch these games, right? No one's going crazy here. Did we all forget what last season was? It's funny how some of these narratives get brought up. I didn't even see that. I've been bouncing around all week. So
you're all good. No, there was a few different local articles that were written. I think one from I think Rob maybe wrote one, and then I know there were, or maybe it was Matt, one of them, and then I think there was another on PackersNews.com, and then I saw somebody nationally wrote one that Rappaport I think it was Rappaport retweeted. So yeah, there's definitely, that was a definite narrative to some extent over the course of this last week. The other one was that the Warren Sharp receiving statistics for Green Bay that said that they were, I don't even remember the exact terminology, the number one of like unsuccessful rates due to wide receiver error or something to that extent. It was a very interesting way of
acronym that. Can we acronym that?
Something. We got to get something. We got to figure out an actual statistic there somehow. But I mean, this is not like noteworthy in the fact that we know that Jaden Reed was tied for third in drops with 10. We know that Dontavian Wicks led the league in drop percentage. Like these are well-known aspects of both of these players this past year and the offense as a whole. But this definitely sort of took on a little bit of its own narrative this past week. And very clearly it affected the offense and certainly Jordan Love as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, buddy, we talked about this when we did our initial like Savion Williams stuff, like in February, right?
Yep.
The Packers have kind of targeted guys with inconsistent hands and been like, this is I guess their mindset must be that it's a coachable trait, right? I mean, that's what you have to believe, because you certainly want guys to catch the ball. That's a big part of the game, right? So
yeah, no, for sure.
But they've kind of attacked it as a market inefficiency. Before, or I should say that since Dontavian Wicks, no drafted receivers had a worse catch rate than Savion Williams. And the Packers drafted both of them, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think Matthew Golden has very good hands, like very, very, very good hands. He plucks that thing out of the air. But to a certain extent, they must think that getting from, bad to average is something you can coach up. And I don't know how much of that is informed by the growth Devontae Adams made with the Packers, because that was certainly a issue that he had early on in his career.
Yep.
I just hope they can coach it out of him, because they mentioned that who was Ryan Wood said that Dontavian Wicks didn't have a drop in the OTA practice on Tuesday, so hopefully that whole situation is fixed.
Yeah,
Right.
the only one I can remember seeing hit the ground was one that Jordan, there was like his one miss of the day. He threw it behind Romeo Dobbs, and Romeo still had the chance to catch it, kind of reached across his body, kind of having to change directions, and only hit him in the hands and definitely clanked and went off the ground. But outside of that, I can't recall anything that was a drop or even a missed throw from Jordan either. So I definitely looked, crisp and clean. But of course, it's just one OTA practice. Wicks had the great play, 50 yards down the field, outraced 3 defenders, and was probably like a 75% speed portion of it. And Jordan threw it on a dime, perfect deep ball. That was again the kind of the big play of the day. But hopefully a harbinger of things to come for Dontavian Wicks and the receivers as a whole.
What's up with Xavier Williams? He hurt? He was wearing the red contact jersey?
Yeah.
No contact jersey?
We unfortunately we didn't hear anything on injuries whatsoever of who had what or what they were out with.
We got 4 draft picks who are banged up already. Gutter ball, how dare you?
Yeah, not great. Hopefully Brinson and Oliver are back sooner rather than later. Obviously, everyone participated at rookie mini camp, so it was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, anytime you see like the red jersey, it's usually more just precautionary. I think it's very funny to have a non-contact jersey at a non-contact practice. That seems a little bit interesting to me. Of like, hey, we know that we're not allowed contact, period, but really no contact with this guy. But yeah, I'm hoping it's just precautionary and there's nothing to worry about there. Brinson, Oliver, I hate Justis when rookies miss any period of like practices early on. If any of them are back for camp, or if they're all back for camp, it's much ado about nothing for the most part. But man, I'm really a strong believer in getting those guys off to a strong start. And thankfully we've seen like Christian Watson struggled a lot through injuries in his rookie year, and it obviously ended up all right. And then, even this past year, Edgerrin Cooper struggled a little bit early with injuries, and he had an unbelievable end of the season. So it's not necessarily this death blow entirely, but I really, really hate when rookies can't get out practicing with the rest of the group.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're going to need all the help you can get by the time training camp rolls around, because the turnaround from training camp to preseason games and then the regular season, I mean, it's just back to back to back to back.
No, big time. Yeah, they're going to need all those guys. No question about it. The good news was Christian Watson was out there doing some stuff, and Matt said that he was ahead of schedule. Well, I take nothing for granted with that stuff. I talked about how, like, I think it was either the mini camp or OTA or the training camp coming off of Bakhtiari's awful injury. Like, he was out there doing some stuff, and I remember being like, oh, this is like really exciting. Like, Bakhtiari's already doing some stuff. Like, would you look at this? And then it didn't work out so great. So I don't trust anything, but yeah. I guess good news from Matt that he's ahead of schedule is certainly better than nothing.
Yeah, it's better than seeing him in a cart or something like that. But I'm sure Christian's hyper motivated. I mean, he's
contract year
going into a contract year. Yeah, I mean, I think if he were healthy, he probably would have been traded from this team just because the team probably would have wanted to get an asset for him instead of let him just hit free agency. But he's not in that position, so he has to his back's against the wall. He has to go earn it this year, right? So yeah. I'm sure from his perspective, he wants to get on the field healthy and show as much good film as possible. I've had 2 ACL surgeries, right? So I'm just going to assume that he's not going to be back until November-ish. If he is, great, more power to him. I'm just not going to hold that spot in my mind to, bank on that or really
was that
even
early January, last week of the season, right? Like that he tore it.
Yeah. So I'm thinking like early November, late October.
Stephon Diggs out there running routes with coming off a torn ACL 7 months today.
That's not a football game though. So
very true. See. Very, very true. No, I'm not saying you should. I don't think him coming back in 7 months and being out there in preseason is probably a good idea for Christian. But no, if he can get out there, no, I'm totally being facetious. But no, if he can get out there for anywhere in that November range, I think that'll be a very nice sign, and hopefully as close to probably not 100% obviously, but anywhere near close to it would be a very pleasant surprise. And just even seeing him out there would be an awesome aspect for this Packers offense. All right, two lightning round ones before I get you out of here. Integrity of the current salary cap system has been brought into question by one Roger Goodell. What was your are we worried about void years? Are we worried about cash up front? Are we worried what's our big concern here?
Yeah, I think it's salary conversions. If you look at the net worth of a lot of these guys who own these teams and have passed them down through family and stuff like that, they don't have that much money. I know people are ripping their hair out right now, saying that like I'm some sort of billionaire sympathizer or something like that. That's not me. Cash up front is a very interesting thing, right?
Yep.
Because there's important. There's 16 weeks or really 8 weeks where you're making money. I guess 16 weeks because of the television contracts and stuff like that, or 17 weeks because of television contracts, but you're not making money off of home revenue. I guess you're doing that in the preseason, but for all intents and purposes, right? You're not making any money from most teams January through August. Yep. And now the meta in the NFL is essentially, oh yeah, pay everyone, at the beginning of the season, at the beginning of the new league year in March. Just pay all that money out immediately. The Packers have been around for over 100 years. Their cash reserve is like $500 million. So that's like 1 year of cash.
Yeah. Yep.
Or two years of cash in terms of just player salaries and stuff like that. Some teams have guys who have a lot of money. Like Stan Kroenke is basically building a second downtown in Los Angeles, right?
Yep.
What's his name? Walton, who just bought the Denver Broncos. Walmart, ever heard of it?
Yeah.
Right? These guys,
pretty good business.
These guys are like Mike Brown, who owns the Cincinnati Bengals, is closer to you and me, Andy, than he is like the Walton family or a Kroenke or something like that. So the level of money is very different at the NFL ownership level. And teams just saying, oh yeah, just pay your entire season's worth of salaries the first day of the new league year, 6 months before new checks start coming in, is something that a lot of ownership groups can't do right now. Yeah. Right. And I think that's one reason why you're seeing teams like the San Francisco 49ers sell. I think they sold I think it was like 10%, close to something like 10% of their franchise. And it got valuated at like 10 billion, which is, really nice for those guys.
Right.
But they sold off like 10 billion or 10% of their franchise for the money. And they've we saw it this offseason where they were talking about the Purdy stuff, right? Where they're like, all right, we're going to pay Purdy, but we're going to take a step back in free agency from a cash perspective, right? Because we just gave all that money to Ayuk, and now we're kind of regretting this Ayuk thing. And they told, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, from a cash flow perspective, we're going to slow it down a little bit. Like, we're going to pay Brock Purdy, do all that stuff. But we're not going to be spending money left and right for, cash that has to be due today. I mean, there's not very many businesses that can operate like that. Like, I don't know how big your operation is, Andy. So maybe I'm talking out of pocket. Time. But if you had to pay everyone that you needed to on January 1st for the entire year.
Yeah.
Would you be able to, there's not that many businesses that can do that one big chunk and accelerate all that money a whole year forward. And then, once you do that one time, right, you're saving money on the back end, and, you can kind of live in that world, but you have to be able to do it that one time. And there's a lot of these ownership groups that aren't able to do it that one time because their entire equity is built into their franchise. So they could do it, but they would have to sell off part of the franchise. And is that something you want to do, especially for these big family teams? Like the Bidwells have owned the Cardinals forever.
Yep.
Right? Like that's always been their team. The Maras, the Rooneys. And once you have kids, those shares already start breaking up, right? And then those kids have kids, and then those kids of kids of kids have kids, right? So it's a lot of coordination, a lot of like, wait, I have to sell my shares, like a lot of that stuff. Who wants to be bought out? The NFL right now, I think I looked it up. So like the right, doing this live on the air. How much money is Elon Musk worth?
Oh my God. I don't even know where to begin.
All right. Elon Musk's net worth is $381 billion. The San Francisco 49ers were valuated at 8.6. So let's go 8.6 times 32. Assuming that a team could sell at the rate of the San Francisco 49ers, the entire NFL would sell at $275 billion. That means Elon Musk would barely be able to afford it. And there's probably no way that he could be liquid enough to afford it. Right. Let's
not give any ideas. Let's not give any ideas.
I don't think yet, buddy. I think he's got bigger problems. I don't think he's really trying to deal with this right now. But what I mean, like, this is increasingly becoming tougher to sell leagues to a single entity. And there's a lot of, I mean, the sad thing is a lot of the teams that do it right, like I think a lot of people in the league have respect for like the Rooney family because of the runway that they give both general managers and head coaches and stuff like that, right? Versus let's say Shad Khan. Okay. Shad Khan gives long runways to guys. He's very moneyed. He was one of the richest owners in the league when he came and bought the Jacksonville Jaguars. But people don't think he's a good steward of the team because he really doesn't know anything about football, right? So he hires a Trent Baalke, and then he's like, "Cool, Trent Baalke runs my team." But then that gives a Baalke an opportunity to run that thing into the ground without you really being able to see any of the warning signs, right? So these teams that kind of know how football works and have like institutional knowledge of how it works are also the same people who are struggling to do this cash up front thing because their entire equity is tied into the team because they got the team through inheritance. They didn't get the team because they were private equity or running some venture capital firm or are drilling oil everywhere and stuff like that. And some people have figured out how to diversify and do things around the stadiums. I think this is a big part of like people talk about the dome stadiums and they're like, oh, they're doing it for like the Final Four and the Super Bowl and all this stuff. They're also doing it for concerts, guys.
Yep.
Like
WWE
that's a big,
events.
Yeah, like there's a lot of things you can do with a dome stadium that you can't really do with a an open stadium. So I understand why it's like tough for a team in Cincinnati. Like Stan Kroenke moved the team from St. Louis to Los Angeles. He's trying to build a second downtown to Los Angeles. St. Louis's population, I think since it's either the 80s or 90s, has gone down 30%. He wouldn't have been able to build a second downtown in St. Louis when their first downtown is essentially already like rotting, right? So like it's going to be a really interesting conversation where it's like, can a franchise in Cincinnati actually build enough stuff around Cincinnati to make money to be able to accelerate a full year of cash payments? And I guess that's the conversation NFL owners are having where they're like, okay, the Philadelphia Eagles full blown made a game plan and they made a game plan around the television contracts. And we're accelerating this thing and we're throttling it until 2029. And that's when new television contracts are going to come up and the cap is going to jump like crazy, because the way we track things with smartphones, with apps and all that stuff, the NFL is in a much better position to ask for a whole lot more money for for digital subscription services in 2029 than they were with their traditional television broadcast services, the last television contract they made. And the Eagles were basically like, yeah, we're spending cash like crazy and we're going to run on fumes from now until 2029, basically. And that is our game plan. And I think there's a lot of NFL owners right now who are like, look, even if we had that idea, I don't know if we could execute it because we couldn't get our hands on the funds. And I think that's some of the conversation. How you fix that, I don't know. I do wonder if it's as simple as just like you can't convert salaries into roster bonuses.
Okay.
I mean, that would kind of fix some of this stuff. No one really did this cap manipulation stuff until COVID, right? The Patriots did it a little bit. The Saints did it a little bit, but they were at the tail end of quarterbacks who were, if they weren't 40, they were approaching 40, right?
Yeah.
And now that's the standard in the NFL. Like the Packers in 2026, they'll probably convert salaries into roster bonuses just to keep some of the pieces around on this team.
Yep.
Right. Jordan Love is like 26.
26.
So we're living in a very different world. A lot of people learned a lot of ways to get around the cap, to keep their teams together during those COVID seasons. Right. And I'm sure some owners are like, can we at least try to close Pandora's box? Can we try it a little bit? So I think that's a concern for the league. I don't know how you solve it. Again, I think salary conversions to roster bonuses, you could take those out. You could take out void years. You could make like a limited amount of them, right? I mean, you start going down like the NBA path where you can start creating like, okay, you get one exemption a year or two exemptions a year or something like that. And now that's something and I have to start tracking.
I was just say, please no. I keep an eye on NBA, CBA stuff for just reasons, because crazy. I think it's interesting. And especially with what they've done with the first apron and the second apron stuff, it is like, if you think you have to have a PhD in NFL salary cap stuff to cover a team, the NBA stuff it's insane. It's absolutely insane. So yeah.
So there's probably ways to do it, whether they can get together and actually agree on something. We'll see. TBD.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued to see how that goes. I actually don't hate the idea in general of closing some of the loopholes on that stuff a little bit, whether it be void years or I think you could even potentially like.
So one final point I want to make, and I'm sorry I'm cutting you off.
No, you're good.
But one of the points people make is, does it even matter? Doesn't matter that teams are spending more cash in 1 year than another, if ultimately over 5 years, every team has to basically spend the same amount.
Yeah. Sure.
I kind of hear that out. But if there's actual ownership groups that have no interest in ever really having those peaks and valleys because they cannot afford the single peak. And again, everyone's like, you're I'm sure there's going to be comments that are like, you're crying for billionaires and all this stuff. The Packers have been around for 100 years. They have $500 million in their emergency fund, right?
And they worked hard for that.
They worked hard for that. 100 years to build that. And what they've saved is 2 years of player salaries right now. That's what it costs. For now.
Yep.
If a team is not willing to ever have that one big peak, but other teams are, and it becomes a clear situation where you have to throttle it like the Niners have done in the past, like the Eagles are doing now, like the Kansas City Chiefs have been doing for a long time. If it has to be that to compete for a Super Bowl, then even though you're paying the same amount over a 5-year period in cash, right? Would a team ever be able to compete for a Super Bowl without hitting that throttle. And if there's teams that are just not willing to hit that throttle, what does that do for the competitive balance of the league?
Yes,
I
it's a
think there's a
competitive disadvantage.
right. And I don't know if we have the full data to be able to say yes or no to, answer that question, whether that's a possibility, whether it's something that happens, right? Or whether that's even a reality. Maybe a team figures out how to smartly do it and just keep the cap balanced, year over year and stuff like that. The Packers before COVID were basically like that team in the NFL, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Ted was that way for sure.
Yeah. So I think it's at least worth having a conversation about that.
And I'll spin it in a different direction and just kind of take it away from the like billionaire Apollos thing. I just like the fact that the NFL is looking at it from a competitive balance thing of like, is there, because it matters. Like to me, it very much matters to try to keep the playing field as equal as it possibly can be, because that's what ultimately makes the NFL great. Is we don't get into these, like I'm just like to a point disgusted of the conversation at times of like, well, it's the 28th NBA market with OKC versus the 26th NBA market with Indiana. It's like, dude, who freaking cares? Like, you have two really good basketball teams that are playing against each other. Like, I don't ever want it to be that way. And and then in the NFL, I love the fact that there is some level of competitive balance and parity. I don't want to be tracking exemptions and exceptions and like all of that stuff from an NBA standpoint. I just think that this is smart to look at in some way to try to get ahead of it before it's a bigger problem than what it is even right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's the health of the league is always good. we talked about it with like XFL stuff, and people were like, "Who do you hope does well?" And people think we were like, I don't know. It's just like, you have relationships with people, and maybe you end up rooting for them or whatever, right? But ultimately, our goal was like, I would like for every team to be 500. Right, because that's it creates more drama, all that stuff. You get more people invested. It sucks. If you're a Jaguars fan and you're trying to watch this team, and they start every season 0-4, and you're just like in draft season by October, right? That doesn't get you more compelled and invested in the NFL.
All right, dumb question. Could you just get rid of signing bonuses and just go to a base salary only model?
Players would like that money up front, because if you want to put that in the market, time in the market is important.
You could
right?
still do guarantees. You can still do guarantees. Yes, they would probably prefer it up front. No question about it. I mean, you could still do guarantees, but you just be base salary guarantees.
Yeah, I mean, the NBA doesn't have signing bonuses, right?
Yeah.
Theoretically, you could. The only thing is, they probably want that money up front. So I don't know if
the Players Association.
I guess you could put the money in escrow and then say like, we're gonna put this in like an index fund, something like that. But then like you're still putting the money in escrow, so that doesn't solve any issue. You could, but there. I mean, just from a money perspective, right? I mean, there is real value to getting money up front versus money paid out over a 4 or 5 year span. Because if you're gonna do anything other than just like buy stuff with it, any sort of investment or anything like that, right? That's money that you're losing. So
no, for sure. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the NFLPA thinks of the whole thing as well, because they definitely have some risk of a disadvantage of you. I feel like I know it maybe evens out over 5 years, but it definitely feels like with teams using more void years, if they're constantly borrowing from the future, it just feels like you're always spending more money. You're constantly spending more money, where if that ever catches up, then it maybe is not that way. So I'm very interested to see how this all plays out. The only other thing I was going to mention before was that you got your Bryce Huff trade, not to Green Bay or not, but to San Francisco, but you finally got your Bryce Huff trade on the way out of Philly.
Yeah, I think San Francisco paid too much. I mean, I don't know how many teams were involved in that market, but I thought they had. Philadelphia had to move that contract, and you took on half of it, and you paid, what is it, a fifth that can turn into a fourth? I think is
I
what
didn't
it was.
I heard there was like a mid-round pick or something like that, or a mid day 3 pick or something to that extent.
So again, I think they overpaid a little bit, but he's a designated pass rusher. He'll do well in that scheme. I mean, that's one reason I brought it up with us, right? Because Bob Saleh is probably going to run something pretty similar to what Jeff Hafley's going to do. Makes some sense. I'm not surprised that he didn't come to Green Bay, especially after we spent those 2 mid-round picks. On
no, for sure. Had his breakout with Robert Saleh in New York, so it makes sense that Saleh would be interested in reuniting with him for sure as well. Just when you think, Justice, that this is probably going to be like a shorter episode, we don't have a ton to go over, we start talking escrow accounts. For those of you who are listening, we're going to tell you how to set up everything next week. We're going to be your financial advisors next. No, we're not going to do that at all. I cannot thank you enough, though. Amazing stuff as always. What do you got coming up over on Acme Packing Company?
Yeah, I think it's time to finally start publishing those scouting reports on other teams. So, we got the news with the Detroit Lions. I think that gave me the extra motivation. I'm going to see if I can get 1 or 2 of these out this week and then really start getting the ball rolling, because I don't think we're going to get that much news outside of what you report from OTAs tomorrow. So
I'll do my best. I'll try to give you as much content as I possibly can to keep us busy through this week. We got mini camp next week. Usually, I think just one of those are open. I think one of those, they usually go bowling or something. And I think the other one is closed as of late, but we should get news on that coming up if either 1 or 2 of those are open, and then kind of go from there. But then from that point, after minicamp next week up until training camp, is the time where you really don't want to hear any news more than anything. Yes. If you hear anything, any news, it's usually bad news. So
it's an arrest. It's an arrest. Yeah.
Yeah. Usually an arrest or suspension or something to that extent. So
stay out of bookings until July 25th. Really stay out of bookings in general. But yeah.
You don't want to hear anything. I go follow him on social media at JUMOSQ. Find him on acmepackingcompany.com. And of course, usually here on Tuesdays, right here on the Pack a Day podcast, you can find me at Andy Herman NFL. That's going to do it for us today. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.